Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm your host, Jessica Neal, and I'm flying solo today, but that's okay because I want my guest all to myself. Today, I have Jeff Joseph here, and Jeff actually is, I guess you could say, just started at a company that we have talked to on the show before. We had the founder of this company come on. His name is Dan, and the company is Manifest OS, but I'm excited to say that Manifest OS is now a sponsor of TruthWorks, which is just, I don't know, my little podcast entrepreneur hat. I'm just very proud of the show, and I'm very proud that people want to be part of it and sponsor it. And I have to thank you, listeners. It's because of you that they want to. So thank you. And Jeff, thank you, and welcome to the show. And thank you for joining Manifest. I want to talk all about it. How are you today?
I'm awesome. I'm 6 weeks in at Manifest, and I have to tell you, we're super happy to sponsor your program. I think the message that you're getting out is very important for the community, so we're happy to do it, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you today.
Yay! Yay! Well, good. Okay, and enough about how great we are at TruthWorks. I want to talk about how great you are. So I wanted, before we get into all things Manifest, I want to talk about your career because you've actually had a pretty spectacular career and you've accomplished a lot of things, and probably in a field that folks don't really think about until they need to think about it, right? And that is in immigration. And I want to know, kind of go back in time, what drew you to this? How did it all happen? Because you got pretty far up there at some of these bigger law firms.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've been incredibly blessed to have, found this career. I was one of those kids who was not very athletic, but I could argue my way to any sort of victory. And so I kind of knew early on that I had the skill set to be a lawyer. I remember reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and that sort of sealing the deal for me, that I knew not only that I wanted to be a lawyer, but I wanted to be that sort of humanitarian civil rights lawyer. And so when I, did really well in high school debate and got a debate scholarship in college, and so the writing was on the wall for me. When I got to law school, I quickly sort of searched down human rights internships. And, I didn't get into the schools that have big human rights programs, but I was able to find some work doing asylum cases at that time, it was mainly people fleeing the former Soviet Union. So a lot of Orthodox Christians and Orthodox Jews, LGBTQ people who were, persecuted under that regime. And now we were filing their asylum cases. So I did a little bit of that work in college, in law school. And then when I graduated law school, got a job with a corporate immigration firm. But I spoke Spanish and had a little bit of trial experience. So within that corporate immigration firm, I started building out a little removal defense family practice. And within a year and a half was very successful in that practice. And so my wife and I started our own law practice and worked together for 25 years. So we built out a full service
didn't
immigration.
know that. You worked with your wife. I didn't know that.
I did. We met in law school.
Okay.
So, yeah. And,
well, that is, takes a special relationship to be able to spend that much time together.
Yeah. I mean, so my immigration story is a love story too, because we were both public defenders at the time in law school. And the way that system works is, if a spot comes up anywhere in the state, you take it or you go to the bottom of the list. And so we were engaged, about to be married, and had the prospect of being, on two different parts of the state. And so I was like, I'm going to take an immigration job so that I can avoid that. So immigration was sort of happenstance. But in many ways, that happenstance sort of formed the basis of my career.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, you sort of having this kind of desire as a kid, you got inspired by To Kill a Mockingbird and human rights. And then, you fall in love, you take this immigration job so you don't have to be away from the woman you want to spend the rest of your life with. But what about the immigration sort of drew you in? Because you've stayed in it for your entire career. Did it fulfill something on that human rights sort of aspect of things?
It did. I mean, most people think of immigration as a border issue, but it's so much larger than that. It really touches on every corner of our economy, the way we live our lives. migration patterns, a whole bunch of things touch on immigration policy. And so, I've had the experience of working in it. And the thing that I think drives me and keeps me coming at it is behind all of the policy, behind all the forms, behind all the cases, there's always a human being. And for that particular human being, this immigration journey is one of the most important things that they do in their lives. And that's something that, when you're born in a country and you live in a country your whole life, that's not something you can understand, that how important the immigration journey is for somebody going through it.
Yeah, for sure. And it is the policy is changing all the time. Like, it depends on who's in office and what have you. But, there's always a new something that makes the process either less complicated or more complicated. And it's really hard to navigate if you don't have someone like you.
Yeah, immigration is really interesting because it's a creature of the law, right? Congress created the Immigration and Nationality Act, but immigration is also a political wedge that can be used in campaigns, right? From both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats. And so there's not a lot of motivation to solve immigration through Congress when it can be used in political campaigns, right? So what we see is administrations coming in, Democrats and Republican administrations coming in, and they have to do the work through executive orders by necessity, right? Because Congress isn't changing the law.
Today's show is sponsored by Manifest Law. From startups to scale-ups to enterprise, Manifest Law is the AI native immigration law firm. Just think about that. AI native immigration law firm. Come on. This is great. There is no such thing, but there is Manifest Law. And they have all of your immigration needs handled. It's real-time visibility. It's fast filings. It's in over 40 countries. And did I mention the AI? It's got an AI-enabled workflows, a tech-forward experience, and straightforward pricing. So if you are in HR and you are doing a lot of immigration, Manifest Law is the solution for you. If I was running HR, guys, I'd be getting it. All right, go out there and check it out. And so as an immigration lawyer, I would imagine that, sort of you have to play a completely bipartisan role because it's not about the executive, that's in office or whoever, but it's really about the person that you're trying to help, and you're trying to help them navigate this system.
Right. I mean, I think, regardless of the politics, you have to be able to maneuver, know the policies, know the regulations, know how it happens in order to effectively guide clients. I would actually say that immigration is more tied to economics than politics. It really is about where we have needs in our economy and where we have a gap of U.S. workers or workers that can't do the job. Most of the immigration system is set up to screen such that you're not replacing U.S. workers. So to me, it's
Right.
much more tied into what we need and where the gaps are in our economy that aren't being filled by U.S. workers.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because that's kind of interesting. So what are you seeing right now? Because, from a hiring perspective, many of us are in the, a lot of us work with technology and in Silicon Valley, but I think listeners have jobs that are all over the world in all different types of industries. But what are you seeing from a labor perspective in the US? Like, where's the demand? Is it still primarily technology and bringing in that expertise, or are you seeing it in other fields as well?
We're seeing it across the board. I mean, I think obviously we're seeing it in technology, AI, those kind of industries will always have the need because they're so rapidly growing and advancing. It's hard to see it, to talk about it in terms of demand really in immigration, because the truth is the visa that we rely on most for those type of jobs is what we call the H-1B visas, which is for highly specialized jobs. But it's hard to talk about it in terms of demand because there's only 65,000 of those visas available every year. And the demand for foreign labor is way, way higher than 65,000, right? So It's not so much a demand issue. It's a luck issue. It's who gets, one of the things that changed this year is that the higher wages you pay, the more of a chance you have of getting one of those 65,000 number. So one of the things that's happening in the industry now is the bigger you are, the bigger of a company you are, and more able you are to pay the wage, the higher your chances of selection, which is great unless you're a small business or a nonprofit or a rural hospital or,
Right.
something like that can't afford those wages. So that's, one of the things we're seeing is that, smaller businesses are being disparately impacted by this new wage rule.
Right.
We also see, sort of a pipeline issue from student to H-1B, right? Where there's a lot more restrictions against students now with cutting off duration of status and getting rid of optional practical training. That's usually the pipeline that companies use to bring in
Right.
workers.
Right. So if you're a student here from overseas and you're studying, you don't get as long to kind of figure out your situation after you graduate. Right. Essentially is what it is. Like you pretty much have to leave.
Yeah,
Or
I
no?
mean,
Is it?
it
Yeah.
used to be that you're allowed to remain in the country as a student as long as you're in status, right? As long as you're maintaining 12 credits. So
Right.
theoretically, if you get your bachelor's degree, then your master's degree, then your PhD, and then you work, you can be here for several years. This new rule truncates that to 4 years. And so you don't get duration of status anymore. It cuts the grace period down to 30 days. So it does a lot to sort of eliminate the flexibility that students had to move between programs, to change majors, to do things like that. So
Yeah.
it is going to impact, I think, the pipeline for talent.
Well, yeah, it's essentially not great because, if you are a student here and let's say you pick the wrong major and you're really good at engineering and you're not as good at finance, right? Or you're not as passionate about it, you're kind of stuck, right? You can't switch that major and go learn more
You
or
can, but
differently.
it becomes really, really hard to stay on track in terms of what you want to do for your OPT planning. I think for employers, the bigger problem is, those F1s when they're graduating, most likely
Uh-huh.
they're going into entry level jobs, right? Which
Right.
means that the employer is going to be paying the lowest wage for those jobs, which means
And
that
they're
those
not going to
students
meet the
have
criteria. Yeah.
yeah. So they have the least likely chance of getting selected for H-1B. So we're bringing in all of these students every year and educating them, sometimes 500,000 students a year, but there's only a spot for 65,000 of them. And even with that, only if they're being paid the highest wage. So the reality is,
Right.
the pathway for students is narrowing quite rapidly under this administration.
Right. And for the higher wage, you're going to have to be in a field like engineering
Exactly.
and
So that's
be
what employers are
graduating.
struggling with now.
Yeah. And graduating from one of the top tier schools.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That sort of creates a bad dichotomy, like have and
Yeah,
have
because
nots.
Yeah, I mean, I think, employers have always relied on that pipeline of talent, and especially in engineering and tech, a lot of the foreign students are the ones that are studying in those fields. And so, it'll be interesting to see how employers
Yeah.
adapt. They do. Employers adapt, but we'll
Yeah.
see how it impacts and plays off downstream.
Yeah. And what do you see like the there's so much talk, within the government around AI and AI infrastructure and data centers and all the things that, we're going to have to build to scale to the to get all the benefits and realities of what AI is possible of in years to come. Do you see them thinking about being more flexible on some of these things or open, like are there people lobbying for, change and difference with that in mind?
I think so. I mean, one of the things that I think is going to happen very soon in the immigration space is electronic filing. Right now, everything that we file is paper based, which is, if you think about
Which is
the
crazy.
thousands and thousands of applications, it's crazy that we do that. So I
Yeah.
think once we go towards modernization and the government's starting to accept electronic filing, I think that the pathway for AI companies to move into that and automatically adapt their systems is going to be really great.
Yeah.
I know what we know for right now is that the government is using AI, right? They're using it in their adjudications. They're using it to read through cases before they go to court. So the government is using it in immigration cases. And, it's just a matter of time before most immigration attorneys are also utilizing it to make cases more efficient and effective.
Do you think they'll ever like change the limit of 65,000?
I don't know. I mean, I think getting anything done, that requires a statutory fix, and getting anything fixed in the statute is like a pipe dream, right? Because once you open up that for H-1Bs, you're opening up the universe for other immigration changes. So if I'm being completely honest with you, after 30 years doing this, the answer is no. I don't think they'll ever change the 65,000.
Because I think it's been at that for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that in certain categories, like for example, you could do returning workers, right? If you had a returning worker, they were exempt from the cap. Congress let that provision sunset, so that went away, and so you can't rely on sort of returning workers to get around the cap. You only can rely on sort of the cap exemptions.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, it's a problem. I think the future world, if you ask me, what makes most sense is we have the data, the granular data on a local level. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is able to crunch data on a local level and say, in Silicon Valley, here are the jobs that we need. In, rural Fort Morgan, Colorado, here are the jobs we need, and allocate visas based on that, right? So in areas where you need more H-1Bs, give more H-1Bs. In areas where you need more agriculture visas, give more agriculture visas. So making it real and not arbitrary is, to me, where we should be going is really, really responsive to the economy.
Well, yeah, and that makes perfect sense. Is there a desire to do that or not really?
Not really. I mean, I think a lot of the policy think tanks have proposed using, BLS data to sort of drive immigration policy, but it hasn't, sort of taken effect. And again, that would require a massive statutory change.
Right. Which isn't likely going to happen. So fascinating. But okay. So you spend your career doing this. You're helping people at a very special time in their lives. When I ran HR at Netflix, I originally actually started out at Netflix running all of recruiting. So many people on the show know that that's where my roots are. And the immigration process was always, I always looked at it from a human perspective. And, if I was going through this, what would I want that experience to be? And I had seen many companies not take as much care and not have as much transparency maybe around the process. And for me, I wanted to not only make it a great experience, even though you're having to do all of this paperwork and all of these things, but also make it easy. And then by doing that, the added bonus was that because we did this really well and we were very flexible about it, we didn't have sort of like you had to be, at the company. You had to be at the company for a very short amount of time for us to start this process. It was actually a competitive advantage at the end of the day for us in getting talent because we were so willing to be flexible and thinking outside the box. And, if the H-1B cap had been reached, we would be creative about other visas we could potentially get and O-1s and, and so forth and so forth. But it really was, I think, an important part of our strategy. And I think there's probably lots of other companies that believe the same way, but I had seen, unfortunately, a lot of companies who didn't put enough thinking and effort around what they really wanted that experience to be. Do you see the same out there in the world, or are companies, maybe they are taking it as seriously as I did?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason you were extraordinarily successful in your job because you did see it as, a human experience, not just as sort of a corollary task that you have to do in your HR function, right? Because I think that most foreign nationals going through this process see immigration as one of their benefits, just like retirement and health insurance. The company's treatment of them and how they handle their immigration is to them as important as those other types of benefits, right? So really working with your immigration counsel to give you sort of really good guidance about knowing your company, knowing your company's values, knowing, how they prioritize budgets, et cetera. And then really working with the global mobility managers and in-house counsel to structure portfolios and programs in immigration that are focused on recruitment, retention, keeping that talent, right? Because the truth is it's easy on an H-1B to port to a different employer, right? You can start work for a new employer on the filing of the application. So we really want to keep that talent in-house. And the best way to do that is to have really good, proactive, immigrant-friendly sponsorship policies. So that can include things like, we'll pay for premium processing. We'll sponsor dependents.
We did all of those things.
Yeah, we won't wait a year for your green card.
Right.
We'll sponsor you faster. If you don't get selected by the H, we'll look at maybe sending you abroad for a year and maybe bringing you back in on an L, right? So sort of creative solutions that keep people on the payroll rather than make them feel like an outsider.
Yeah, and I think, because as we talked about, the policies are kind of always changing. This, they don't want to get thrown out of the country. They want to stay here. They want to be productive. They want to, they want to make a living and take care of their families. Like and so having not to worry about anything, I think, and you just take that worry away, it's such a relief to people. And that I think builds a level of trust with that person, a sense of loyalty with that person. And again, at the end of the day, you just, I always think about no matter, whether it's immigration or whatever an employee journey is going through, it's that experience. They're all humans. And as humans, we all have things going on in our life. And if we can build an infrastructure that allows people to not worry about things that you can kind of take off their plate, and then that way they can be more productive and contribute more and be happy when they're stressed out about all these other things. That adds friction into the system that is unnecessary, and it's a big distraction. And it not to say that we want people working all the time, but it distracts them from work.
Yeah. My favorite cases are the ones where I'm working with an employer. We bring on an F1 student in OPT. We get them an H-1B. They get selected in the lottery. We get them an H-1B. We start their green card process. We get them a green card for them and their family. And then 5 years later, we're getting them their citizenship. And, being able to go through the entire immigration journey with somebody from student to citizen is something that very few people get to do. And it's so rewarding. In those cases where I've done that, I always go to their citizenship interviews because it's so cool to be there at that moment when, for them, it's one of the greatest moments of their lives. And to be there on the journey with them and to be able to watch it happen it's really rewarding as a lawyer.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Manifest. I want to talk about this company because I'm actually, I'm not just excited because you guys are a sponsor of the show. I'm just excited as someone that has had to work with immigration for my entire career that now there is a company that is disrupting how things are being done. And I can't think of anyone that really kind of disrupted immigration, at least in my career. It's always just been the same. And you work with this law firm or you work with this law firm that's bigger or this one that's more boutique. And, you try to get the best law firm that you can, but you guys are really taking a different look at it. And it's, I think, going to be not only extremely helpful for people that are going through immigration, but extremely helpful to the corporations that you're working with.
Yeah. So, Manifest is built on a very different model. The traditional law firm model, especially in immigration, generally you have one attorney, 4 paralegals, right, that work on a client or a case. And the profits sort of flow up. They trickle up, right? So when you make money on a case, the people that make the most money on it are the equity partners. They're the ones that share in the profits. Well, when you have that, and that's always been the way that law firms have been set up, not just immigration, but all law firms historically have been set up on this sort of equity partner model. But the problem with that model is when the partners are taking the profits, there's very little incentive to invest in things like technology, right? And that's been fine historically. But now where technology is moving at the pace that it is, that inability to invest in the infrastructure is going to be problematic for law firms because, number one, if you're relying on human beings to do the work, you have to have real estate. So when you have headcount and real estate, that cost gets passed on to the client, right? And the manifest model is built around disruption where we don't have equity partners. We don't have owners that are getting profits distribution. Rather, the lawyers have shares in the company itself. So there's every investment to reinvest back into the company and into the technology. And we're letting the technology do the work, the production-based work of the paralegals. So we don't have the headcount and we're fully remote, so we don't have the real estate. So all of those costs are getting passed on to the client. We're able to lower costs, which means we're able to increase access to justice and provide more individual representation to immigrants outside of the B2B context and the B2C context. So for many reasons, we're lowering costs, we're expanding access to services, and we're creating a world where lawyers get to really be lawyers, right? They're not doing all the tasks and the administrative stuff. They're really holding the client's hand through the process, providing a lot of compassion and empathy in a world where we're taking on a lot of the front end and back end administrative functions of a lawyer. We're not bogging them down with that. So they're able to really do the complex thinking and hand holding and compassion based work that immigration requires. And so it ends up being a more rewarding job for lawyers, which means that we're able to, attract really good talent to do the work.
Yeah. And so is that sort of the reasons a lawyer will want to work on your platform is because they have the ability to be the lawyer they always wanted to be versus the lawyer that they have to be, which is, bogged down in paperwork and process?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons why lawyers are choosing a manifest model. Number one is, we have alternate pathways to leadership. We're not just the traditional equity partner pathway. We have a very flat leadership model where everybody's sort of a team. And so that's very attractive. But I also think, we have alternate ways of paying lawyers because you can have ownership in the company that's not, traditional. So
Right,
it's
because
not just the job itself.
If you're at Fragaman, you're not an owner in that firm.
Exactly, right. And
Yes.
here, every lawyer can be an owner, part of the process. So I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of reasons why people are choosing it, but I think the main one is that it's just a different way of life. It's just, a different way of practicing law, and it's much more attractive to feel like a lawyer rather than a platform operator.
Right, exactly. And then I think you mentioned also that the platform isn't just for B2B, but like if I'm an individual and I'm needing immigration help, I can go to Manifest OS and get that help.
Yeah, actually, Manifest started as a B2C business. They were very
Hmm.
intentional about, before we go start representing big companies, let's make sure we can do it the right way. So they started out representing individuals, and they really saw a need for alternatives to H-1Bs, right? For people that got shut out from the 65,000 number. So they really marketed first towards what we call O1s, extraordinary ability,
Hmm.
EB1 self-petitions and national interest waivers, and they had an extraordinary success rate because the AI was iterative. It learned as it filed applications, it learned kind of what evidence the government liked, what evidence the government
Mm,
didn't like, and it iterated on that. So as cases got filed, the approval rates went up. Those employees ended up getting embedded in companies, and those companies started picking up the phone saying, we want Manifest to do our immigration work. So that's how we built out our small and medium-sized business pipeline. And recently now we're being invited to, the big leagues with some of the big players. So
yeah.
we've scaled very quickly, but we've done it intentionally and correctly in the right way. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is true. I'm like, as you were saying that, I was thinking back on, filing the O1s that I helped file, and generally these were with really very senior candidates. And we were really trying to get them here because we needed them to fulfill a niche sort of business strategy that we were trying to figure out internally. And it was true, like they had to be written a certain way, but that was really just relayed based on the experience of the lawyer and what they had seen, and they had only seen the amount of cases that they had seen. So,
correct. Yeah,
and then AI sees all the cases.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty
So
cool.
having a paralegal that's not only able to put, and when I say paralegal, I mean, I'm putting that in quotes because it's really the AI, but
Right.
having an AI native paralegal that's able to kind of not only put the case together, but learn from past cases and iterate it is revolutionary, right? Because what that means is approval rates just go up. Your chances of success go
Yeah.
up. It also means that we can predict your success at the outset of a case based on the evidence you submit, right? So we can give you a good assessment and say, yeah, let's go for it, or no, you probably need to go out and get some more evidence, and then we'll refile.
Right. Right. Ah, that's so exciting. I don't know if everybody else is like as geeky as I am on this stuff, but it's really fascinating and interesting. And again, as a business, you need this. And then as an employee, this is such a great benefit to have, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just excited that you guys are making the whole process better and that it's more adaptive and you're learning case by case so much faster, right? At the speed
Yeah.
of
And
light
from,
versus like the speed of a human.
yeah. And from an HR perspective, I think about when I was managing massive global programs, kind of what the heartaches were for our in-house professionals. And one of those was escalations, right? Foreign nationals who
Hmm.
are just not happy. Either there was a deadline missed or the forms are
Right.
wrong or whatever the escalation is, that ends up falling on the global mobility manager's desk. One
Yeah.
of the things we're trying to do is prevent that from happening, prevent those escalations from happening. And we use AI to do that. So one of the coolest things that I've seen out, for that we've laid out for a client is what we're calling our sentiment meter. So the AI actually reads the communication between the legal team and the foreign nationals, and it pulls out emotion words. So it's looking for things like anxious or, any
Ah,
word that shows like the sentiments of the clients are going up and down, and it alerts the HR managers proactively so that they can talk to the legal team and say, so and so is feeling really anxious. Can you reach out? So it's
right.
those kind of things that we can use AI to do that make the human experience so much better, but also prevent escalations in the companies internally.
Yeah. Yeah. And just from a competitive perspective, I haven't seen this, but you are in the industry, so you might know better than I. But some of the firms that you would normally work for, especially if you're a larger corporation like Netflix was, we worked with Fragaman and other firms that are quite large. I know that they are doing, some of them, maybe not all of them, but some of them are figuring out how to bring AI into their organizations. But I don't think any of them are where you are. And also they probably are sort of buying different tools that help here and there because they don't have internal engineering teams that can build out these types of things. So, like from a competitive perspective, how is Manifest positioned against sort of a traditional law firm or even some of these other AI companies that are, focusing on legal as, their business segment?
Yeah. So the truth is every law firm that's in immigration space is going to have to adopt AI. There's no question about it. The
Mm,
question is how they adopt it. And you're correct that I think the model that most firms are using is by purchasing third-party platforms, right?
right.
And operating on third-party platforms, which works. It works. The problem is that to get all of the functionality that you want out of those third-party platforms, you have to have different integrations. You have to have an integration for finance. You have to have an integration for onboarding. You have to have an integration for HR. So everything requires a different plugin, and those plugins don't often play well together, right? So trying to get the system to coordinate, trying to look like it's a consistent experience for the employee, right? When you're logging into that system, no matter where you are in the world, it's the same. But more
Hmm.
importantly, Congress changes every Friday. There's a new memo that comes out every Friday, usually at 5 p.m. on a long weekend. And we
Uh-huh.
have to adapt, right? We have to adapt our systems. We have to adapt our forms. We can do that instantaneously when we have an in-house team that's doing the engineering. If you have to outsource that, you pay for it, but it takes, potentially months to engineer the kind of changes that need to happen more instantaneously. So you can do it. It's just, it's going to be clunky to try and get it done if it's not
Right.
in-house and native.
Right. Right. And the cool thing is everything you're doing is native.
Yeah.
And yes, so I'm just so excited about Manifest OS and I hope my listeners are too. Listen, if you're, a company and you're looking for an immigration firm to work with, I think you should certainly consider Manifest, not only because they're AI native, but because the experience is going to be ultimately better for your employees, which is really the goal. The goal is to make that experience as elegant and as frictionless as possible so that they can feel good about being part of your company and focusing on work and not focusing on these other things. And at the end of the day, it's a hard talent market out there. And if you want to be competitive, this is something that you need to have, and you need to have it done well. So, Jeff, thank you for coming on the show. I know the listeners are going to love this. And also, if you are someone who needs just immigration as a person, go check out Manifest because clearly they can help you. I always put our guest on the spot, Jeff, and I know, well, get ready. I always ask our guests to leave us with something inspiring. So what would you like to leave the listeners with today?
I mean, I think, for me, there's a lot of noise around immigration. There's a lot of, opinions around immigration. But at the end of the day, I think we all know somebody that's an immigrant and been touched by immigration, and just keeping those stories in mind that no matter, where you stand on the political divide about immigration, that you have in some way in your life been touched by an immigrant, and to remember those stories and keep it in mind and to approach it that way, but also just to approach life that way, that, at the end of every other conversation is a human being. So.
That's so true. That made me feel good. And yes, go out there and be nice to each other. Okay.
Right.
Be good humans. That's all we ask. All right. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. I loved our conversation, and I'm so excited that you guys are a sponsor, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next few years with your platform, because I know it's just going to get better than it is right now.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for the invitation and opportunity. I really enjoyed talking with you.